Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us here for this candidate forum for Senate District 30 for the special election. My name is Josh Tulip Gates. I am the Senior Program Director of Policy at Enterprise Community Partners. I also sit on the boards of SCAMP and Abundant Housing LA, which are both sponsors of this organization, of this event, along with the Social Justice Learning Institute and United Way. We're going to be having a conversation with our candidates for Senate District 30 that centers on affordable housing in California and locally, of course, in Southern California. So I want to thank the candidates for joining. We have one that we expect to be joining soon, but we have Ms. Ranita Duncan and Council Member Daniel Lee joining us. We expect for Assembly Member Sydney Kamlager-Duff to join us here shortly. And there's the Assembly Member. And I was just going over some welcomes, some intros, and some housekeeping. I also want to recognize our planning committee. And just so you guys have an idea of how this is going to work as well as the audience, I'm going to start with candidate statements. And so I'm going to give each of you about 2 minutes to discuss the things that are high level and important for you. We're going to go through a few questions, and then we're going to close with 2 minutes for each candidate. I do want to say that we're on a bit of a time crunch here because we know people don't want the 2-hour Zoom. So let's try to be as direct as we can with the questions. And I'm just going to start in alphabetical order. And so Ms. Ranita Duncan, please, with your opening statement.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Ranita Duncan, and I am running for California State Senate District 30 as a nonpartisan participant. And the reason I'm running is because I was just really tired of feeling like my voice wasn't heard as a constituent here in California. I moved here some years back, 2014, here for work, and I feel like there's been no change. And in fact, things living situation has been worse. I'm middle class, I'm a single parent, and I'm a veteran. And I have 2 jobs like many other people here. So for a sustainable life and livelihood of my family, just as much as yours, is very important. And I feel like our government officials were not listening and were not doing anything. So I decided to do something about it. I'm very grassroots, and I'm ready for change. I understand government, I understand policy, and I understand strategies. And for me, I'm ready to take action. One thing I have not seen, and I'll probably talk about throughout our time today, is lots of promises with no action. And so I'm coming with solutions, and I hope we can do that. I think we are actually tired of political talk. We're actually tired of people that are talking above our heads and not acting on our behalf. And I mean to change that. I mean to ask the hard questions. I mean to challenge the status quo. And I mean to get answers. Particularly, my top 3 priorities are: 1, economic empowerment for my district. 2nd, I want a community collaboration with law enforcement and our communities and social justice. And finally, accountability for our housing and homelessness for our citizens, and especially for me, and very close to my heart, the veterans. So I'm excited to talk about that today, and thank you so much for having me.
Excuse me, I was on mute. Thank you, Ms. Duncan. And to keep it going in alphabetical order, Assemblymember Kamlager-Duff, 2 minutes, please.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you, everyone, for inviting us today. I'm Sydney Kamlager. I'm the Assemblywoman for the 54th Assembly District and candidate for Senate District 30. I have lived and worked in the Senate District for close to 20 years, from my time working at Crystal Stairs, fighting for childcare funding for both those families who need childcare to help them work or find work, or for those childcare providers, most of whom are women of color, small business entrepreneurs, really becoming an economic engine for so many of our communities. While district director to then Assembly Member and Senator Holly J. Mitchell, working in the communities and the neighborhoods that comprise the district. Sitting on the board for the Los Angeles Community College District, ultimately as its president, really fighting for diversity and also for employment and vocational training services for the 9 colleges across the district. And lastly, and currently as Assemblywoman for the 54th Assembly District. As the Assemblywoman, I have been at the forefront of criminal legal reform, protections for working families, renter protection rights, economic relief during COVID, and holding law enforcement accountable. I have passed laws on probation reform, preventing the use of unnecessary force by police and sheriff's deputies, supporting density with equity when we're talking about affordable housing, protecting workers, funding homelessness prevention, easing restrictions for green infrastructure, and really protecting Black and brown families from displacement. We in fact just voted on almost $9 billion in an economic stimulus package just on Monday. I am running to provide the 30th Senate District a strong, bold leader with experience and the courage to fight for real progressive change. I'm fighting to clean our air and our water, to move us away from oil-based energy, to lift folks out of poverty, to achieve equity in its fullest form, and to keep our brothers and sisters from being killed by law enforcement or tethered to a legal criminal system. This year, I'm excited to be working to bring street medicine to our homeless population, to lower the cost of pharmaceutical drugs, to implement healthcare for all, to get rid of arbitrary gang enhancements, to fully fund the Crisis Act as an alternative to calls to 911 that are responded to by law enforcement, and to create more affordable housing. I look forward to this conversation that we will have today during this hour.
Thank you. Thank you. And moving on to Council Member Daniel Lee.
Thank you, and thank you for having me here today. My name is Daniel Lee. I currently serve as Vice Mayor in Culver City. I was elected to our City Council in 2018 as the first African-American person to hold that position in Culver City's history. In my full-time work, I work at the James Lawson Institute as Project Director with civil rights legend Reverend James Lawson. I'm also currently in the last semester of my doctorate program at USC in social work, focusing on income inequality and generational poverty. Previously, I'd also spent 6 years in the Air Force and California Air National Guard, and a little bit over a decade in SAG-AFTRA. I also went to that other school, UCLA, for my master's program, but I also did my undergrad at USC in film. For the 30th district, my priorities are really around single payer healthcare, building more housing, specifically housing that's affordable, really taking more substantive steps to accelerate our response to climate change on the state level, and having a more comprehensive response to the unprecedented uprisings last year around police brutality and white supremacy. Some of the things that we've done in Culver City that relate particularly to this discussion are: we finally brought rent control to the city for the first time. I'm the only renter on the council, and I think the only for quite some time. We passed a property transfer tax that was ratified at the polls in November. And then just recently, we passed an inclusionary zoning ordinance for mixed use developments. And we're hoping to consider an inclusionary zoning ordinance for residential only developments going forward. I'm very interested to see what the questions are today, because personally, I feel housing, affordable housing specifically, and homelessness are connected. I think in a lot of ways from the state level, we haven't really been addressing them that way. I know a lot of cities have, but I know a lot of state funding is really in the emergency category and not on the consistent, sustained funding to address homelessness specifically. And I think if we're serious about addressing both crises, then we need to make sure that that type of funding comes through on a yearly basis to address both problems. But very happy to be here and interested to hear what the questions are today.
Thank you. And the first question, I'm going to stick with you, Vice Mayor Lee, and this will be the same question for all the candidates, but again, I'm going to stick with the Vice Mayor right now. And should you be elected senator, what type of legislation would you offer, lead in coalition support to secure a dedicated source of funding for affordable housing? And what would be some of the key components for that legislation?
Thank you for that question. I think first I would support some of the legislation that already exists, like I believe AB 71, which has a few sponsors. It's not about affordable housing specifically, but it's about funding for homeless housing and services. I think we need to do both of these things collaboratively. To answer the other part of your question, the actual part of your question, I believe that bills like SB 50 and SB 827 and more recently SB 1120 were steps in the right direction when it comes to housing, but I would have added more specific requirements for affordable housing in terms of the percentages of affordable housing that were required for each development. I think we need a discrete percentage, otherwise it's vague and could easily be cast aside. And then specifically the income level of affordable housing. We can go from extremely low to just affordable, and just affordable for a single person in Los Angeles County, you can be making anywhere from $60,000 to $66,000 a year. The people who really need the help are the people who are making anywhere from $20,000 to $40,000 a year. So I'd be happy to propose legislation that streamlined the housing process if we had specific percentages of affordable housing that were guaranteed, and that the affordability of that housing really matched the affordability of the neighborhood in which it was built. I think we can do that with broader housing bills that are similar to SB 50 and SB 827, but we can also do that with social housing bills, which I'm also very supportive of, and I'd be happy to author each one or co-sponsor.
Thank you. Assembly Member Kamlager.
Thank you for the question. So I have authored a bill that would establish an LA Housing Authority Trust Fund, similar to some of the trust funds that we actually, well, one of them that we see in the Bay Area. And this would allow for us to raise revenue, to finance and to actually streamline the processes of building affordable housing. We have a coordinating problem. We have 88 little cities that make up all of Los Angeles County, and they're all doing their own things. We know that in Southern California, fewer than 20% of permits for affordable housing have been approved. And most of the cities across Southern California have a C grade or lower when it comes to approving permits for affordable housing. So the Trust Fund Authority would change some of that, and it would also allow for the inclusion of community land trusts, which I support because I believe in neighborhood economics. I am a co-author on the socialized housing bill. I am a co-author on SCA 2, which is to repeal Article 34. There are a number of bills that actually folks across Los Angeles have authored that I will be supporting, everything from an affordable housing preservation tax credit to making sure that community land trusts that own units are not reassessed with property taxes when those units are sold. And also another bill that would allow for a statewide eviction defense program, as well as to allow for land trusts and developers who develop affordable housing to have by right, first right of refusal for multifamily affordable housing units. But at the end of the day, we have a coordination issue. $13 billion actually was given to cities and counties over the last 2 years to focus on homelessness, but the coordination and the accountability with regards to those funds, not there. We know that we have 9 agencies that are in the business of affordable housing, and that coordination is not there. And what we are seeing, very similar to vaccinations and very similar to the reopening of schools, is that local control runs amok when cities ask the state to just give them money and get out of the way. We have got to do a better job of using metrics and holding the cities accountable to make sure that they're meeting their goals, not for moderate and above moderate housing, but for low income and even non-market housing.
Thank you for that answer, Assembly Member. Ms. Duncan.
Yes, thank you so much. Wonderful question. I believe first and foremost, just as my cohorts here are talking about, is accountability. I am very large on ensuring that we need a state oversight when money is released for housing. I also believe in doing that we need to start holding accountable the people that we have contracted for affordable housing. And I do also want to look at expanding. So one thing I do want to do is expand. So we have low income housing support. I want to look at expanding the income requirements, because believe it or not, middle class people who make $150,000 still have the same problems that we have, the lower income people have. Two-family households have the same problem where they're having to struggle to pay rent because the cost is so high. And they want to be homeowners. They have been in careers a long time, and we haven't created the bills and the amendments to the bills that we have for like our taxing of houses that we need to look at reforming. We need to look at ensuring that, again, those middle class households are able to purchase homes, and that will help. And then look at accountable to those rent control, because I feel like we have not been accountable to rent control, even though it's been established. Some landlords, especially during COVID, even during this moratorium, I've talked to several people who are still been made homeless by landlords because the accountability and integrity has not been upheld in that. So I want to make sure that whatever I agree to or whatever I'm a party of, co-authoring or helping to sponsor, is going to support all the way up to those who are middle class, $150,000 couples, and not just focus on low income. And when it comes to homelessness and housing, specifically, when we release money as a state, we've said it before, it's a shame to me that private organizations have to file the lawsuits to local government for us to be accountable. So the LA Alliance for Human Rights shouldn't be the one filing the lawsuit. It should be us in the state who have created the legislation and have seen that they have not followed through. So I believe we have not engaged as your state legislators in what we have released our money for. We have not engaged. Those in office that have been in office for years have not actually engaged and held accountable. It's one thing to say something, but we haven't acted. And so I want to make sure that when I'm there, I'm going to ask questions. I'm going to be in the business of the city and county. They may not like it, but that's okay, because we need to actually do something with the money that's released. And we need to make sure that communities and citizens understand how to get the services. Right now, I don't believe they know where to go, what to do, and who to talk to outside of nonprofit organizations that are working to support them. Government agents are not engaging with our community, and I want to change that. Thank you.
Thank you all for the thoughtful insight and the thoughtful answers each of you gave to that question. Now I want to talk about the reputation that LA County seems to have a little bit in terms of its delegation at the state level when it comes to housing matters. We know Northern California and Southern California have their obvious differences, but they seem to be amplified when it comes to talking about housing bills and density. And I've heard SB 50 mentioned and some things along that line. So I want to ask, and I'll start with the Assembly member here. Do you see yourself as that housing champion for the LA County delegation? And how can you be that? And to follow up with that, I would want to say is, are you willing to back against the opponents of affordable housing? And what would be some competing priorities for you at the state level?
So I will say that my bread and butter is always criminal justice reform. And I am a champion for economic equity and economic justice, which I think dovetails quite nicely into the conversations around affordable housing. Yes, I can be and have been a champion for affordable housing and for the creation of more of it, but I am also a champion for equity in that space. Oftentimes when you have bills that are ministerial, as SB 1120 was, it's purely analytical, and it doesn't take into consideration income, race, gender, discrimination, sanctioned discrimination by governments over periods of time. And I think we are not post-racial. And so when we are talking about equity and when we are talking about affordability, we must do it using the lens of race and gender and equity. I'm a proponent of the state getting back into the business of actually financing the construction of housing. I think when you talk about density, you also have to talk about equity. The fact that oftentimes many of the developers that have the capital to be able to build don't look like the communities where they are erecting businesses. I mean, where they are erecting these units. You are not talking about neighborhood economics, cooperative economics, having buy-in by the community of the community with the structures that are being erected. You are not talking about the portfolio, the diversification of the kinds of units that you're trying to erect. I'm certainly not interested in having a disproportionate number of Black and Brown communities always sort of being oppressed by paying rent to a landlord that has no say or interest in who those communities are. We years ago had a GI Bill that said we are going to pay for the purchase of a home by our veterans. We should be doing the same as we're talking about housing, especially in communities of color. We passed a bill last year on reparations. I think we can open our eyes to what actually reparations mean and look like. That's why I think it's really important to double down on community land trusts, so that we are sharing the kind of equity and capital that we need with the communities who want to see a difference. At the end of the day, when you're talking about LA, which is different from Central Valley and San Diego and Bay Area, there are labor costs, there are land costs, and there are bureaucracy costs. 30% of the cost of building are allocated to litigation. So you have to have conversations with your environmental allies about how are you going to cut down some of those costs. You also have to have conversations with your cities about how you're going to streamline and hold them accountable to those processes so that they get more units built. And you have to stop saying it's okay to put more market priced units on the market, but not non-market or low income. And those oftentimes bleed into conversations around race and equity. And they're not conversations that folks like to have. But if you're going to just say density for the sake of density, then you're going to exacerbate a problem that we're already seeing that we're trying to manage.
Thank you, Assembly Member. Ms. Duncan, you look ready to jump in, so have at it.
Yes, can you repeat that question again? Because I want to make sure I'm really pinpoint and clarify my thoughts on this.
Absolutely. The question is, with there being a difference in housing and housing environment, the regulatory environment between Northern, Central, and Southern California, how would you see yourself being a champion for affordable housing in this region?
Yes. I love how diverse our district is, and I definitely am I'm actually a champion now for affordable housing. I'm a champion for the veterans that are homeless over here by where I live on San Vicente. I'm a champion because in 2010, Mayor Garcetti promised that he would house all veterans by 2015. And he has not come back to apologize for not following through with that. As a state legislator, I'm going to champion and begin to hold accountable these promises. We have a lot of empty buildings off of 710 that we as the state legislator has not held accountable, where we purchase these properties. They are dilapidated and empty. We can use them for full family homes. When we seize that property, we did not use it, and it's still now we're trying to clean up. And so I'm going to champion and ask why. Why have we waited so long? Why did it take a COVID-19 for us to begin to take action? And when this is over, will we sit back in our chairs and allow the status quo to continue? I will not do that. I'm going to go in to make sure that we are holding accountable, that we are making sure that our single families are fully taken care of. And I want to mention that part of social justice also has to do with class. Not only just the race injustice and the inequity in that, but the inequity in class and how we are supporting our middle class and lower income people. Beyond race, like I said, our district is very diverse. So we have all ethnicities, genders, and orientations, and the household dynamics are very different. And so I want to make sure that as I champion this, I'm championing for everyone. Single parent home, because I'm a single parent, I want to make sure that women who are single parents and working 2 and 3 jobs are able to afford the housing to where they at one point don't have to choose whether I'm going to work to pay childcare, work to pay for housing. I want us to be empowered as a community. And so I will champion that for District 30 and for the city of Los Angeles. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Duncan. And Vice Mayor Lee, please.
Yeah, thank you for this question. I think, over the last few years, the number that's been quoted in terms of the number of affordable housing units that we need to build in Los Angeles County is hovered at somewhere around 600,000 units. I think the real RENA number is something higher, something around 720 to 800,000. Unfortunately, I feel like the state legislature legislates much like my city, Culver City, has for many, many years. Less than 1% of our legislators are renters. And that's a problem because we legislate as if the state is 90% homeowners when more and more of us are renters. And historically, because of redlining, more people of color are renters specifically. So as a housing champion, my priority would be to strengthen renters' rights first so that the people who are currently housed do not become homeless or do not become further rent burden. The rent burden is usually quoted as 30% or more of your monthly income spent on housing, but I think a lot of people who have a variety of friends in Los Angeles County, which most of us do, know people who are spending anywhere from 50 to 70% of their monthly income on housing, whether they rent or own. And that's not right. I've been working on a number of things locally here. I've been working with Dr. Pete Capone Newton at the Veteran Affairs Hospital in conjunction with the UCLA Center on Inequality and Democracy to try to work on a racial bias program in the context of veterans receiving Section 8 housing and how certain veterans, particularly veterans of color, are often kicked out for reasons that aren't necessarily verifiable. I think that's something that we really need to focus on more on the state level. The protections that we have are good, but if they are not enforced, then do they really matter? I agree that we need to push forward with community land trusts, but they are a Herculean task. I've been working with downtown Crenshaw for the last year in their effort to buy the Crenshaw Mall and the surrounding properties and turn it into a community land trust with some of the help of Liberty Community Land Trust, also based in South LA. While I do think that's a great project, it's very limited in scope. We cannot solve our affordable housing problems with land trust. We need to build more housing. We need to build more densely, and we need to build in some of the places that people don't want us to. I think in the context of moving this conversation forward, we need to have a serious conversation in South LA with traditionally Black neighborhoods and Black homeowners with their neighbors who are apartment dwellers who are frankly being pushed out. We need to have discussions with people in Century City and places like Culver City who don't want any type of multifamily development going up next to them, though they are sad when they see their neighbors move to the valley or buy a home in another state because they can't afford to buy one here. We need to talk about not just having empathy or displaying sympathy, but putting that on display when it comes to policy. And we need to talk about the effects of these long commutes on our greenhouse gas goals and on our real and how they reflect whether or not we really take climate change seriously. So yes, I would be a passionate housing advocate, but I would focus first on making sure that people remain housed and then make sure that we are building enough affordable housing so that the people who currently live in the Los Angeles area don't have to pay so much of their income, their monthly income on housing itself. Because in that context, almost all you can do afterwards is stay home.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. A lot of things that have come up from each of the candidates up to this point have discussed equity within housing and racial equity. We've talked about the effects of redlining, and we talked about the benefits of things like community land trust. And so for each of you, I want to hear and I want to know how you view the intertwined issues a little bit more of racial equity and housing security, and how you'll advance both with an equity framework as a senator. And then to add on to that, what specific long-term solutions, whether it relates to zoning or permanent funding sources, do you see, and how does preservation of housing tie into this, whether it's affordable and supportive housing? And lastly, I'm going to give you the Herculean task of trying to do that in 2 to 3 minutes. And I will start with Ms. Duncan.
Wow. Okay. So intertwining all of that equity, social justice, and everything, the way I would intertwine that as a state legislator is really, I want to focus on, I keep going back to it, accountability, because I really feel like that we have some great legislation. I want to say we have some great bills, and we have great things that we have indoctrinated at the state level. I feel like engaging as a senator is what I would need to do. Engaging and being active with the community organizations that are supporting housing, engaging and interacting in social justice and the real estate organizations that are providing the housing, or aligning the districts in order for our community to receive justice. And also, I want to focus on education. I really think when we do these transition programs and we talk about affordable housing, we talk about living wage versus minimum wage, we talk about affordable housing, but I really want to focus on sustainability, which is us getting out and educating families on better how to purchase homes, better how to economically be able to search for that housing. I think it's interesting that it's hard for people to live here. My daughter and her husband actually had to move because they had to choose between whether they were going to work both their jobs, or they were going to begin to pay more for childcare. So housing and childcare, all of that does tie into together. And for me, I want to make sure that we are educating our families as well as part of our support. So transitioning. Also, I want to talk about like this voucher system that we have, and density. We have areas, and I think I live in an area where they don't want multifamily houses. So I live in an area where they lobby not to do that, close to the VA, where they like the single family homes. And I support the American dream of home ownership, but I believe that we need to create an equitable way to ensure families have sustainable houses. So I want to look at the structures that we have and use those. We don't have to continue to build. We have over 80 hospitals that aren't used. We can put heads in beds. We have over a lot of empty and seized property that we have not made use of. What we need to do in order to do that, though, is incorporate how we're going to do the transportation, so that people, because most of these people don't have transportation, so we have to look at community transportation and getting them to and from, so they can work and live in houses and have housing that we don't have to continue to build. We can revitalize what we actually have and use that in the areas that we live.
Thank you, Ms. Duncan. Vice Mayor Lee.
Thank you. So to address equity, I think it's incredibly complex, and I think we have to think about more than housing, frankly. I think some steps in the right direction, and I was happy to see AB 1400 introduced. I think single-payer healthcare and universal childcare would be steps in the right direction. Both of these are financial weights for people at every step on the economic spectrum, but they are more heavily weighted to working class people, and working class people are more likely to be people of color. If we can eliminate those financial weights on people, I think that would be a step in the right direction. I agree that we need to repeal Article 34 because I believe that there are many opportunities to actually build housing on publicly owned land. And if we were able to do it without a referendum, we could significantly reduce the cost of that housing. Um, I believe in community land trust, of course, but I believe they are a fairly insignificant portion of the solution, insignificant percentage, but I think they do enshrine affordability for a longer length of time than most affordability covenants, which are usually 55 years. I've seen some even around 30 years or so. And finally, I am very passionate about public banking for this reason in particular. The Wall Street banks are corporations, and their first fiduciary duty is to make as much profit as possible for their investors. If we have a public bank, and I know people are working here in the Los Angeles County area and in the San Francisco area to move forward with public banks in the next few years, the community can really set the priorities for what the bank, really wants to achieve, and we can provide more liquidity to fund those affordable projects that developers will tell you just don't pencil out. Sometimes just doesn't pencil out, means, okay, we actually can't make this. Other times it means we're not making as much profit as we would normally make, so we're not going to build this. And frankly, that's what we've heard from a lot of people, and we've taken it to mean that, oh, it's impossible. It's possible if we have different people in charge of the funding structure. And I think public banking will allow us to do that, and it will allow us to build more multifamily developments in the communities that need them at a price point that actually accommodates people in that community. I feel like to some degree, a lot of the market rate units we've seen pop up around Los Angeles County, and particularly in the 30th district, are built for people who will be Los Angelinos eventually. Like they're people who will move here for the weather, for their business, to become a star, either in the acting field or in music or something like that. And they're just used to having a nice place, and they have a great income. We need to build more for the people who are already here, and we need to focus, like I said, first on rental properties and keeping people housed. But another thing that I think a public bank could potentially allow us to do is to set up programs that would really prioritize the funding of mortgages for low income people who are, by and large, particularly in the 30th district, people of color, to buy a house if they want to. A lot of times people either can't afford to save up because their rent is too high, or there are other stumbling blocks that or they can't get approved by the Wall Street banks. I think a public bank could help us address that as well. But it's gonna take a myriad of strategies, but they need to really be focused on affordability generally, but not just in the context of housing. We need to think about healthcare. We need to think about childcare, because oftentimes for many people, those two expenses rival or supersede the cost of housing.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. And Assemblymember Kamla.
Thank you for the question. I think it's important to state that there are no silver bullets to any of these issues, right? It's a myriad of policies and pressure points coupled with enforcement across all jurisdictions. The state is the entity that sets state policy, but it is really, a coordinated effort with smaller jurisdictions, cities, counties, and other localities who are also going to, put their shoulder to the grindstone and say, this is something that we're committed to. So I think that's really important. And the nice thing is, you know, based on the conversations that I'm hearing, is that many of these things are already happening. They're bills that have already been introduced. So the issue is how to get them across the finish line. You know, here in Los Angeles, you essentially have to earn $38 an hour in order to afford rent. And yet in the Bay Area, what we're seeing is that rent prices have begun to drop precipitously as a result of COVID. You know, that tells me that we need to be focusing on how to drive the market and harness the market. We know that more density does not lower the cost of land. It just doesn't. And so if we want to be able to create the kind of density that we're talking about, and the ownership of that land by those communities, it is really important, I think, that the state uses its leverage and capacity to manipulate those kinds of markets. We've done that. We're actually beginning to do that strategically as it relates to climate change and the epilogue of SB 54, you know, actually coming up with agreements with Oregon and Washington to say, how are we going to drive the market on the Western region to make sure that we can make a dent as we're talking about climate resiliency. But if you're talking about equity, racial equity, you know, how do you, there's a bill, you know, that would allow for a tax increment financing so that we can create extra revenue to go into, you know, Vision Zero, complete streets, slow streets, urban parks, you know, urban farms, you know, how we can recreate living zones that allow people to work closer to where they live. You know, there is a bill actually that's been authored this year around taking out exclusionary or discriminatory covenants out of housing deeds. We can actually extend covenants for affordable housing, but it is as much about building the units as it is making sure that you're creating economic investment and opportunity in those communities. It doesn't make sense to build housing if you cannot go to a great school, if you cannot go to the grocery store, if you do not have the amenities that you deserve, that your families deserve, that are in close proximity to where you live. And ultimately, if you don't have some ownership of that land, you know, I just want to say, you know, Black folks have had their land stolen from them, along with many of other people of color, for generations. And I think we should be in the business of reclaiming that, just like we should be in the business of looking at rezoning for commercial and light industrial to figure out how we create the spaces where everyone, right, is able to live with dignity and to afford that shelter with dignity. And it is a lot, once again, I'm going to say it's a lot of moving parts, and it's using the levers of both the state in concert with cities and counties. You know, housing trusts are not the end all be all, but absolutely nothing that we're talking about is the end all be all. So we have to focus that lens. And since we're moving into March, which is Women's History Month, I do want to say, you know, last year, 2 million women left the workforce because they could not manage unemployment or employment, which means being able to live where you are, with managing their children's schoolwork and not having childcare. So when we're going to be talking about racial equity, I think it's also really important that we're talking about gender equity as well, especially when it comes to housing and creating the kinds of communities where everyone feels safe and actually feels like they have an investment in that space.
Thank you, Assembly Member. And getting into some of the more final questions, we may have to lightning round this just a little bit to stay on schedule. So we have discussed, we've discussed that there are some they're just innate challenges, right? The land cost in Southern California is enormous. There are challenges around competing expenses that renters have, and even homeowners have, and there are challenges to even getting to a homeowner's space. And so my question for each of the candidates is, what level of responsibility does the state have relative to those constraints and barriers? And what can the state do in working with and coordinating with local jurisdictions to accelerate the production and preservation of affordable housing? And I will start with Vice Mayor Lee.
I think the state, to some degree, has abdicated their responsibility for enforcement. I feel like Culver City is a case in point. When redevelopment agencies were still active, A lot of cities were given money explicitly to build affordable housing. Much prior to my tenure, council after council after council chose not to build affordable housing. They chose not to build it for many coded reasons that were basically around race and class, mostly race. Culver City, like many cities across the country and in California, was a sundown town. I think, the state needs to recognize the role that it has played and local government has played in fomenting oppression and disenfranchisement, displacement, and gentrification, and pass policies that actively work against those. Obviously, since Prop 16 failed, we need to go back to the drawing board and suggest another proposition so we can do some of this work more explicitly. We still need to repeal Prop 209. But in the interim period, we need to take steps to really coordinate our actions in terms of the type of housing that's built. And from the state level, even though the last few years there have been emergency allocations around homeless funding, that needs to be permanent. And that's what AB 71 seeks to do. The city of Los Angeles got, I believe it was $118 million in emergency funds from the state in 2020, I believe, to address homelessness. And if you just say that number, it sounds like a lot. But if you, remember what it costs to build a building, that's one building. That's not enough. There needs to be more substantive funding to prevent people from being homeless in the first place, but there needs to be much more funding from the state that goes directly to cities to address the homelessness problem and the affordability problem. And I think there are ways, if we just look at land, as the Assembly member has mentioned, we did a public land survey here in Culver City to find places where we might be able to collaborate with LA City Council members to build permanent supportive housing. And cutting out the price of land gives you a little bit of a leg up. It's not the whole story, but it's a step in the right direction. We need to look at creative policies like that, where the state, cities, and even the county of Los Angeles collaborate on more projects so that the funding burden can be shared, and so that we can think of those creative solutions like building on this person's land, using this person's airspace. And by person, of course, I mean jurisdiction. But I think there are very many ways that we can collaborate, but we need to be forthright about the fact that the state has basically been an oppressive machine, especially when it comes to race and class, for almost our country's entire history. And we need to take substantive steps to address it.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. I'm moving on to the Assembly member.
Well, I'm so glad that the Vice Mayor said that the state should be doing more, because oftentimes when we have our lobby days, little cities come and say, oh, it's really important that we have local control, local control. So I'm going to say, well, the Vice Mayor of Culver City said no more local control. So thank you for that, Mr. Lee. The state has 9 coordinating departments that focus on housing. And because of the request for local control, we have actually seen that those 9 agencies have not been able to do what it was that they were intended to do. This year, the governor said that he wants a housing accountability unit, which is really sort of a thread that would tether all of those agencies together so that there is more coordination around appeals, around permitting, around funds that actually go to jurisdictions and developers who want to develop, making sure that we are getting the kinds of units that Californians deserve. And it's also about enforcement. We have had so many cities that appeal the RHNA goals that haven't been able to build what they say they're going to build, but then they say, don't come after us. So, it's time to sue and to begin to hold cities' feet to the fire. Utah had a model years ago as it worked to eradicate its homelessness. And it used the lens of how do we get rid of homelessness in our state across every single department, at the state level, at the county department, at the city level, for water boards, for school boards. And that is what we need to do if we are going to tackle the issues of housing and homelessness, right? to put this as a banner across every single department, if it's DMV, if it's EDD, if it's education, if it's healthcare, so that we are primarily focused on making sure that A, people are not falling into homelessness, B, people don't stay homeless, and C, people are able to live in units that they can afford. One example of this is actually my bill AB 369 for street medicine that actually redesigns the infrastructure for how reimbursements happen, connecting it to Medi-Cal, so that even if you are homeless, you have a primary care physician. That is one way that the state can step in and say, why don't we harness this coordinating entity that we are to make sure that we can address the problem, since it seems like cities and counties are not doing their fair share. I think it's grossly negligent that over the course of 2 years, the state has given $13 billion to cities and counties across the state to deal with homelessness. And what we see is cities just sort of punting the people across the boundary lines from one city to another so that they can say it's not my problem.
Ms. Duncan, please share your thoughts here.
Yes. So as I said earlier, I do feel like the state has provided some good legislation and means for housing and homelessness. What they haven't done is engaged in ensuring, and I have what I call the 3 C's, which is community, collaboration, and communication. First of all, we need to let you, the constituents, know that we are supporting you in housing. And I feel like that is not being heard at the lowest level, what I call boots on ground in the military, engaging with the community. Second is collaboration. For me, I think we as a state organization need to have more oversight in what we have been doing when it comes to housing and homelessness. I know that we have audits of the program, but I was just looking at the department, the Los Angeles Homeless Authority. They have an audit on the spending. They need a program audit. And that needs to be done independently at the state level to ensure that the program that they are saying they're going to have to enact is actually being actioned. And so at the state level, we need to make sure that. I don't think we need to come take over at the state level of the homelessness problem, as we have lots of local organizations. We have so many people that are engaging in this to help. But again, the local officials are not taking action, and we need to see more of that. And at the state level, we need to require that. The other thing is we need to challenge the status quo. It's interesting to me that the governor and all of our elected officials, when it comes to time to be reelected, they come up with some great programs and some great action items. But as I said before, it sounds really good, but then when after you're elected, when are we going to see some tangible progress? And I have not seen that in the last 6 years. Our homelessness situation has gotten worse, and we continue to vote in the same people, look at the same legislation, and say the city, the county, the city council is not doing what they're supposed to do. Okay, they're not. So now let's, at the state level, begin to come in and action what needs to happen and create, like the Assemblywoman just said, they're creating an oversight. Well, I feel like it's too little, too late, and we need to do more, which is us engaging and saying you're going to be accountable all the time for all the programs. We need to have some type of quarterly recap to our community, and we need to be held accountable by the community that we are actioning. And the community shouldn't have to look for where that is. We need to give it to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Duncan. And I did have one final question, and that question was going to be, should any of you be elected, whether or not you would commit to sitting down with our coalition and the co-sponsors of this organization to promote and advocate for housing, but we don't have time for that. So I'm assuming everybody's answer is a yes, and I know you'll be okay with that. But I do want to spend the last few minutes here just giving everybody 1 minute for their final statement, for their closing statement. to cap off what's been a extremely interesting conversation and very informative. And so I will start with Ms. Duncan.
Hi, thank you again so much for having me. And I just want to say this, if we want something different, we need to do something different. And I'm saying we're so used to voting on party lines and on who's been endorsed and who's endorsed who. And I really I challenge us as a community to vote based on the change we're expecting, the transformation that we're expecting, and what we want to actually happen. I want us to see some tangible change. We have not seen that. And I believe I'm the one to bring that. I'm gonna ask the questions, I'm gonna challenge the status quo, and I'm gonna be accountable to you. My 3 core values are truth, integrity, and transparency. So everything I'm doing, you're gonna know about it. And I feel like we haven't had that. I want to bring that to us as a community, and I want to collaborate closely with our city officials to ensure that our district is being taken care of. So I encourage you, I have a town hall on the 25th, Facebook. So encourage you to log on and ask me more questions, and also go to voterenitaduncan.com or renitaduncan.com to find out more about my platform and how I want to help. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Duncan. Vice Mayor Lee.
I'll just say, very simply, the housing conversation is a very difficult one. But I think the more we have it out in the open and the more we talk about the historical inequities of our past housing policy, the more we can actually see the way forward. I do think it is an issue that we have so few renters in the Assembly and in the State Senate. I think our policy would look different if there was more diversity in terms of our representatives in that area. But the long and short of it is we need to find a way to build more housing, and we need to agree about where it needs to be built. Those are difficult conversations, and I think they need to happen both on the state level in hearings in both of the state houses, but they also need to happen in the communities that are most in transit to change. Because a lot of those communities and a lot of those people, I think, would be more open to change if they could see and feel the struggle of their neighbors and how much this housing burden is really disrupting their lives. I think we all need to work to have more empathy and have that empathy reflected through our housing policy. And I'm committed to do that at the state Senate level. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor and Assemblymember Kamlak.
Thank you for this opportunity. I think it's really important that we have folks in the legislature who can find votes, who can speak to policy and bring in the nuances and the perspectives that are oftentimes not shared because people don't have the courage to do that. I think it takes courage to stand up to the governor. I think it takes courage to even stand up to the pro tem. And that's courage that I have demonstrated time and time again while I have been the assembly member. We're going to talk about affordable housing. We have to talk about anti-poverty. We have to talk about wage theft and the fact that workers don't have the protections that they deserve. We have to talk about displacement and gentrification. We have to talk about repatriation. We have to talk about, yes, the history of the state, but we also have to talk about the fact that if we continue to look at policies without using a race, without using a class, without using a gender lens, then we are going to be no better off than where we are right now. This great state that says it is so progressive is also the same state that denied housing to Black workers in Richmond and in Milpitas. And we have the opportunity to replicate that 2021 style if we are not having courageous, bold conversations about how equity needs to be infused into all discussions that we have. I think I have shown that with the work that I have done with criminal justice, if it's battling probation or battling the DAs or battling even police officers, as it is around education, as it is about making sure that we're funding worker protections and renter protections and keeping folks from being evicted, as it is about changing the tenor and the tune about what affordable housing means for all of us.
Thank you, Assembly Member. And This has been an extremely valuable conversation. So I want to thank all the candidates for joining us today. I want to thank everybody for attending, and I want to remind everyone that is attending, if you haven't voted, the election's next Tuesday on March 2nd. And that's it. That was the forum. Hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you.